I had spent the last 3 weeks counting the days until I could finally come home. My suitcase wheels dragged across the gravel like they were carrying the weight of my entire exhaustion. And for the first time in days, I let myself breathe. I was ready for silence. I was ready for my porch, my trees, my land, the place I bought specifically because it was far from nosy neighbors, far from HOA nonsense, and far from the world's noise. But the moment I turned the corner toward my backyard, the smell of fresh concrete hit me first. Then came the sound. Metal clanging, jackhammers pounding, machinery roaring. My exhaustion snapped in half. I froze. My peaceful tree-lined property, normally so still you could hear the wind shift, had been ripped open like a crime scene. Towering steel beams stabbed into the dirt. Scaffolding wrapped around half-completed structures. Workers in orange vests stomped across my grass as if they owned it. And right in the center of it all, a massive concrete foundation was being poured. Wide, long, unmistakable. A bridge. A full-scale bridge. On my land. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I blinked, hoping I was hallucinating from jet lag, but the noise, the chaos, the destruction, it was all real. My land. My private property. And these strangers were carving through it like it belonged to them. Heat flooded up my spine as I stormed toward the nearest worker, a guy with a clipboard who didn't even bother to look at me when I shouted, "Who gave you permission to build this? This is my property." He shrugged with the kind of indifference that only someone who doesn't care can muster. HOA approval. All permits cleared. Take it up with them. The HOA. The one organization I had intentionally made sure had no control over my land. My jaw tightened as I snatched the permit papers from his hand, and right there on the bottom was the signature of the last person I wanted to see. Karen Reynolds. The self-appointed queen of the neighborhood. The kind of woman who believed HOA power was the same thing as divine authority, except my name wasn't on the document anywhere. Not my signature. Not my consent. The paper was a lie, and somehow she had the audacity to pretend it was legal. "This is forged," I snapped, pointing to the signature line that was supposed to be mine. "I didn't sign this. This is illegal." "Look, man," the worker sighed, already turning away. "We got paid. You got a problem. Call the HOA." My hands shook with rage as I stepped back toward my house. I didn't even take my shoes off before dialing the HOA office. The phone rang twice, and then that smug, condescending voice slid through the line like oil. "Willow Creek HOA, this is Karen Reynolds." "Karen," I hissed. "Why is there a construction crew on my property?" A small, sugary chuckle answered me. "Oh, so you finally noticed. I was wondering when you'd call." Her tone made something in my chest snap. She spoke as if this was a minor landscaping adjustment, not a full-blown invasion of private land. "This is illegal, Karen. You had no authority. My land is not under HOA jurisdiction." "Actually," she said, voice sharpening, "we sent you notices. You never responded. That counts as silent approval." Silent approval. As if ignoring mail I never received meant she could steal the ground under my feet. By the time I hung up, the anger inside me was a living thing. She thought she could bully me. She thought she could outsmart me. She thought I would roll over. But she had no idea what was coming. I marched straight toward the HOA meeting, ready to explode. The moment I stepped into the HOA meeting room, every conversation died. The air felt thick, almost heavy, as heads slowly turned toward me. And there she was, Karen Reynolds, sitting at the center of the long table like a queen on her throne. She didn't look shocked. She didn't look nervous. She didn't even look annoyed. No, the moment her eyes met mine, she smirked. A slow, confident, taunting smirk that made my blood boil. It was the kind of look someone gives when they think they've already won. "Well," she said loudly, projecting her voice across the room so everyone could hear, "look who finally decided to attend a meeting." A few board members exchanged uneasy glances, but none of them dared speak. Karen folded her hands neatly, leaning back in her chair as if she were greeting a guest instead of facing the man whose property she had just violated. I walked straight to the table and placed the forged permit in front of her, the papers slapping against the wood. "Explain this," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it carried through the room like thunder. Karen lifted the papers between two perfectly manicured fingers, giving them only a lazy glance before setting them down again. "As I explained on the phone," she said sweetly, "we mailed you several notices. You never responded. Per HOA bylaws, failure to object equals silent approval. It's not our fault if you ignore your mail." Gasps and murmurs rustled through the room. She didn't even flinch. I took a step closer. "My land is not under HOA jurisdiction. It never has been. You know that." She shrugged, tilting her head toward the board as if seeking their sympathy. "He says that every time he disagrees with something, doesn't he?" She chuckled lightly. "Some homeowners try to pretend the rules don't apply to them." A few board members nodded, not because they agreed with her, but because they were terrified to do otherwise. I could see it in their eyes. They were scared of her. Intimidated, controlled, they kept staring at their papers, their hands, the floor. Anywhere but at me. "You forged my signature," I said quietly. Too quietly. "That's a crime, Karen." She waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, please. Let's not get dramatic. It's a community project, a bridge that will benefit everyone, including you. It's not like we're building a shopping mall. Be reasonable." Reasonable. She expected me to be reasonable while she stole land out from under my feet and funneled community funds into a project I never approved. Her tone was dripping with arrogance, and the more she spoke, the clearer it became. This wasn't about improving the neighborhood. This wasn't about community development. This was about power, control, and something about her calmness, her complete lack of fear, told me she wasn't acting alone. "There's more going on here," I said, staring directly at her. "What are you hiding?" Karen laughed. Actually laughed. "Mr. Carter, you're tired. You just returned home. Why don't you go get some rest and leave the decision-making to the board? We've got everything handled." Everything handled. The words echoed in my mind like a threat. I looked around the room, at the board members refusing to meet my gaze, at the neighbors too confused to speak, at Karen basking in her illusion of control. My frustration wasn't just anger anymore. It was fuel. She thought this was over. She thought she had won. But this wasn't the end. It was the beginning. Without another word, I turned and walked out, letting the door slam behind me. My hands were still shaking as I reached my house, the forged permit burning in my pocket like a reminder of the fight ahead. That night, long after the sun had disappeared, I spread my old property files across my kitchen table. Deeds, surveys, zoning maps. And then, as I flipped through page after page, something caught my eye. The first irregularity wasn't small, it was enough to unravel everything. At midnight, the house felt too quiet. Not peaceful, heavy. The kind of silence that presses down on you when something is deeply wrong. My kitchen table was buried under stacks of folders I hadn't touched in years. Deeds, plats, old surveys, zoning exemptions, every scrap of paper tied to the land I had fought hard to buy. I never imagined I'd need to dig through them like this. But Karen had pushed me into a corner I had no intention of dying in. The overhead light flickered as I spread out the documents, the edges curled from age, smelling faintly of cardboard and dust. My property deed sat in the center, the paper that had once given me peace of mind. Underlined in bold letters, "Not subject to HOA oversight or governance." My eyes traced the sentence over and over again. There was no loophole, no gray area, no fine print hidden in a footnote. My land was explicitly exempt, and yet, there was a bridge being built on it. I compared the deed to the HOA's so-called authorization document, the one the worker had handed me. The moment I aligned the signatures, the truth slapped me hard. The handwriting wasn't mine. Not even close. The loops were wrong. The slant was wrong. The pressure of the pen strokes didn't match. Someone hadn't just forged my approval. They hadn't even bothered to forge it well. I sat back, rubbing my hands over my face, feeling a slow burning fury spreading across my chest. This wasn't carelessness. This was intention. Someone had deliberately manufactured a legal trail to give the HOA false authority over land they didn't own. I grabbed my phone. "David," I said when my lawyer picked up, sounding groggy but alerting himself quickly. "I need your help. Now." I sent him photos, deeds, permits, the forged signature. There was a long silence on the line, the kind that makes your stomach twist. "This isn't an HOA mistake," he finally said. "This is fraud. Serious fraud. If what you're showing me is accurate, someone committed a felony. Potentially multiple." Hearing it out loud made the situation feel suddenly larger, heavier, like I had stepped into something far deeper than a neighborhood squabble. "I'm going to dig on my end," David said. "Tomorrow morning, go to the county zoning office. Ask for the project submission records. If the HOA submitted those permits, it'll be on file. And if they didn't, then somebody else did, which means the HOA isn't working alone." I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw concrete flooding over my grass, strangers walking across my property like they owned it, and Karen's smug smile burning a hole in my mind. At sunrise, I was already driving to the county office. The zoning department was a beige, tired-looking building that smelled like old coffee and paperwork. The clerk behind the counter looked just as exhausted as I felt. I handed her the parcel number and permit code. "I need the official submission," I said. She typed slowly, squinting at the screen. After a moment, her eyebrows lifted. "This is strange." My heartbeat kicked up. "What? This permit? It wasn't filed by an HOA representative." She turned the monitor slightly toward me. "It was submitted by a development firm." My breath caught. "Which firm?" "Silver Lake Holdings," she said, scanning the file. The name hit me like a bucket of ice water. I didn't know why, yet, but instinct told me I'd heard that company somewhere before. I leaned in. "Who signed for them?" She clicked deeper into the digital folder. "Oh," she said, her expression freezing. "The CEO personally signed the authorization." My pulse thudded in my ears. "What's the name?" She hesitated, as if unsure how much chaos her next words would unleash. "Richard Reynolds," she read aloud. "Karen Reynolds' husband." The room tilted slightly as the truth clicked into place. This wasn't HOA overreach. This was a coordinated land grab. The clerk's words kept echoing in my mind as I walked out of the zoning office. Richard Reynolds, the husband of the woman who had mocked me, dismissed me, and pretended my land belonged to her HOA kingdom. The realization crawled underneath my skin like something alive. This wasn't incompetence. This wasn't miscommunication. This was coordinated theft, planned, organized, and executed by the HOA president and her developer husband. They weren't just stepping over the line. They had sprinted past it. I drove straight to the county records building, the same folder of forged permits sitting in my passenger seat like evidence from a crime scene. Inside, the records office smelled of old paper and dust. Rows upon rows of filing cabinets holding decades of development plans. The clerk directed me to a terminal, and with one search, Silver Lake Holdings appeared like a stain that refused to wash out. The deeper I dug, the sicker I felt. Silver Lake Holdings had submitted a complete development proposal, over 100 pages long, detailing a luxury housing expansion right behind my property line. A private gated subdivision, high-end homes, scenic walking paths, exclusive access points, and at the center of it all, the keystone piece connecting their proposed neighborhood to the main road was highlighted in bold. The new pedestrian and vehicle bridge. My bridge, my land. My property being used as the heart of their multi-million-dollar project. My stomach twisted as I scrolled through the blueprints. Their entire infrastructure depended on that bridge. Without it, the proposed community had no legal access road, no approval from the county, no green light from investors. Without that bridge, their whole development would collapse before it even began. And that was when the truth settled in. They didn't simply want my land, they needed it. Without my property, Their empire couldn't stand. The next stop was a private land consultant, someone David had recommended. His office was modern, cold, efficient, the kind of place where million-dollar deals were made over coffee. He laid out maps, charts, and county acquisitions like a forensic scientist performing an autopsy. "Your property," he said, adjusting his glasses as he reviewed the documents, "has been on the county's long-term acquisition interest list for over a decade." I frowned. "Meaning what?" "Meaning they've wanted it," he explained, tapping the map. "But since you weren't selling, the land was untouchable. But now," he shifted the blueprint showing the bridge overlay. "The HOA just increased the value for them." "How much value?" I asked. He smiled the kind of smile people make when they know you're about to be very, very rich. "A lot. The bridge changes everything. You're sitting on a gold mine now." Gold mine. The words felt unreal. My stolen land had accidentally become a financial weapon, and not for the HOA, but for me. I sat back, letting the reality sink in. Karen thought she had outplayed me. She thought she had cornered me. She thought I was powerless. But she didn't know that every inch of concrete they poured, every beam they installed, every dollar they spent, was making my land more valuable, not theirs. And suddenly, anger wasn't the only thing fueling me. Strategy was. Patience was. If I played this right, they would bury themselves with their own greed. I thanked the consultant and walked out with a new plan forming, one that required restraint, silence, and the coldest kind of revenge. I wasn't going to stop the construction anymore. I was going to let them build every inch of that bridge. Then I'd make them pay for all of it. Every morning, before the sun had even finished rising, I stood by my window with a cup of coffee in one hand and a quiet, calculated smile on my face. Not because I enjoyed what was happening on my land, but because I was filming every second of it. High-resolution cameras, 4 of them, were now positioned along the edge of my property, catching every truck that rolled in, every worker who stepped foot where they had no legal right to be, and every HOA board member who strutted around the construction site like they owned the place. My land had become their playground, but now it was also my evidence vault. Each day looked the same: workers marching through mud, machinery roaring to life, supervisors barking orders. And every day I recorded hours of footage, capturing each violation, each trespass, each smug visit from the people who thought they were untouchable. The more they built, the more they handed me ammunition. They had no idea they were starring in their own legal disaster. At the next HOA meeting, I watched from the back row while Karen and her loyal puppets celebrated the project's progress like they'd won a championship. She presented updated photos of the bridge structure, beaming like she was unveiling a masterpiece. "We're ahead of schedule," she bragged. "This will be the most transformative project Willow Creek has ever seen." There were nods, scattered applause, even a few cheers. Most of the board members didn't care about legality, budgets, or boundaries. They cared about staying on Karen's good side. They worshipped her authority, terrified of being the one who challenged her. And Karen fed off that fear with a smile that said she believed every word she spoke. Then she unveiled her next wave of spending. "Since the bridge will be a centerpiece for the community, I've proposed decorative lighting along both sides," she announced. "We'll add premium landscaping, flower beds, trees, walking paths, and a small rest area with benches." Another $30,000 gone in minutes. The board approved every item without hesitation, their signatures flowing across the page like they were signing birthday cards, not gutting the HOA's reserve fund. I watched, silent, while they tossed homeowner money into a pit disguised as beautification. None of them noticed the strain in the treasurer's voice, or the way he avoided looking at the numbers projected on the screen. None except me. Meanwhile, my private investigator had been busy digging through Silver Lake Holdings' history. His report, delivered in a manila envelope on my doorstep, read like a catalog of corruption. Silver Lake had been linked to zoning manipulation, hidden land deals, pressure on HOAs, and in 2 separate counties, accusations of falsifying documents. They were experts at exploiting weaknesses in neighborhood boards, and Karen, with her inflated ego and hunger for power, had been the perfect gateway. The deeper I read, the clearer the picture became. The Reynolds couple had spent years running similar schemes, each one bigger than the last. But this time, they made a fatal mistake. They targeted someone who wasn't under their control, someone who wasn't afraid of them, someone who knew the law better than they expected. Back at the HOA meetings, Karen kept pushing harder. Faster construction deadlines, more money for materials, more pressure on the board. She couldn't afford delays. Investors needed progress. The development depended on her timeline, and that desperation meant more mistakes, more spending, and more cracks in her perfect facade. It was only a matter of time before someone on the inside broke. A few days later, just after sunset, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The message was short, only one line, but it made my heart pound. The project is over budget. They're planning an emergency fee increase. Suddenly, the HOA's grand plan wasn't just shaky, it was collapsing, and someone inside was finally ready to talk. The tension in the community center felt like static in the air, thick, buzzing, ready to snap. People who once walked into HOA meetings with blind trust now moved with suspicion, whispering to each other as they filled the chairs. I could feel the shift. The homeowners had started to sense what I already knew. Something was wrong. Something big. And Karen was running out of places to hide it. I sat in the back, the whistleblower's message replaying in my mind like a warning siren. The project is over budget. They're planning an emergency fee increase. For the first time, homeowners weren't arriving with polite small talk or hopeful enthusiasm. They came armed with questions, frustration simmering under their breath. Karen walked onto the stage with her usual confidence, wearing the same polished smile she used whenever she wanted people to trust her blindly. But tonight the smile didn't land. People didn't smile back. They didn't nod. They didn't clap. They just stared. "Good evening, neighbors," she began, voice too bright for the mood. "As you all know, our wonderful new community bridge is progressing beautifully. We're ahead of schedule, and it's shaping up to be a landmark that will increase all of our property values." No applause. Not a single person moved. A flicker of annoyance passed through her eyes before she continued. "However, due to unforeseen costs, material shortages, contractor adjustments, and infrastructure improvements, the board has unanimously decided on a modest fee increase." That was it. The spark. "How much?" a man shouted from the front. Karen clasped her hands together delicately, pretending she was delivering harmless news. "Just a small adjustment of $150 per household. Effective immediately." The room erupted. People shot out of their chairs, yelling over each other as frustration poured out like a dam, breaking. "You said this was fully budgeted. We didn't agree to any of this. You're draining the reserve fund. You lied about the project cost." For the first time since I'd met her, Karen looked unsettled. She tried raising her hands for quiet, but her voice was swallowed by the chaos she had created. "Everyone, please, please, calm down," she insisted. "This is a long-term investment for our community. We're all going to benefit." "No!" A woman near the aisle cut her off, voice trembling with anger. "You benefit, Karen. You and your husband." The room fell into a temporary hush at the mention of him. Karen's jaw twitched. "That's an outrageous accusation," she snapped. People began demanding receipts, financial reports, budget audits. The treasurer shifted nervously, pretending to shuffle papers he didn't want to show. Every board member suddenly looked like they wanted to crawl under the table. And through it all, I sat silently in the back, watching the fractures deepen in Karen's empire. I didn't need to yell. I didn't need to join the chaos. I needed them to turn on her themselves, and they were doing it perfectly. Karen slammed the gavel on the table. "Enough. The decision is final. The fee increase will be implemented immediately." Her voice cracked. The room didn't quiet. It didn't obey. The homeowners were done listening to her. And that was when I knew the timing was perfect. This wasn't the moment to reveal everything. Not yet. I needed the foundation of her authority to crumble just a bit more. I needed every homeowner to question her integrity. I needed the board terrified and scrambling. And now, they were. That night, when I returned home, I sat at my desk, opened my laptop and reviewed the evidence, every forged document, every trespass recording, every bank transaction tied to Silver Lake Holdings. Everything was lined up. Everything was ready. With a slow, steady breath, I clicked the final file into place. I closed my laptop, knowing the legal bomb I'd built was finally ready to detonate. The community room was overflowing. Every seat taken, people pressed along the walls, the tension so thick it felt like the air itself was waiting to explode. Karen stood at the front of the room, dressed in her usual power outfit, chin lifted, wearing the forced smile of someone trying desperately to hold on to control. She tapped the microphone twice, ready to launch into another speech filled with excuses, manipulations, and half-truths. But tonight, I wasn't giving her the chance. She opened her mouth to speak, but the moment I rose from my chair, her smile faltered, just slightly, just enough for me to notice, just enough for the entire room to sense a shift. "I need the floor," I said, not loudly, but firmly. Karen stiffened. "Mr. Carter, this meeting is already in session. If you have a concern—" "I'm not here to voice a concern," I cut in. "I'm here to present facts." A ripple of whispers ran through the crowd. Karen's facade cracked another inch. She tried to maintain control, but control was already gone. I walked to the front and placed a thick folder on the table, the weight of it landing with a heavy thud. "These," I said slowly, "are the official county zoning documents for my property. Dated, stamped, and verified. They clearly show that my land is not, nor has it ever been, under HOA jurisdiction." I angled the pages toward the screen as the clerk projected the images. Gasps filled the room when the bold statement appeared. Property designation: private, not subject to HOA regulations. Karen's voice pitched higher. "This is out of context." I ignored her and opened the next section. "And here," I said, holding up the forged permit, "are the construction authorization papers. The ones you claimed I approved." I clicked a remote and both signatures appeared side by side on the screen. My real signature on the deed, and the laughably fake scrawl on the permit. "This," I said calmly, "is forgery." The room erupted again. Louder, angrier, sharper than before. Karen raised her hands, trying to regain order, but no one was listening. I wasn't finished. "And since some of you still believe this bridge was for the community, let's discuss where your money actually went." I pulled out the financial statements. Line after line of HOA funds quietly funneled into Silver Lake Holdings. Another click, and the company's name appeared on the screen behind me. "Silver Lake Holdings," I announced, "is owned by Richard Reynolds, Karen's husband." A collective gasp shook the room. A few people cursed under their breath. One woman stood with her hand over her mouth. Even the board members looked stunned, some pretending to be surprised, others genuinely trembling. Karen's face drained of color. "These accusations are outrageous, fabricated." "They're not fabricated," I said, my voice cutting through her panic. "Because earlier this week my attorney handed all of this to the county prosecutor." Silence. Heavy, chilling. "The county," I continued, "has officially opened a criminal investigation into fraud, forgery, and misuse of community funds." The room exploded. Homeowners shouted, demanding answers. Board members scrambled, looking at each other, realizing staying aligned with Karen now meant sinking with her. One of them stood abruptly and announced he never saw those transactions. Another claimed Karen handled all financial approvals herself. They weren't protecting her anymore. They were abandoning ship. And through it all, Karen screeched over the chaos, her voice cracking, "This meeting is over. Over. Everyone sit down. This meeting is over." She slammed the gavel so hard it bounced off the table. But I didn't sit down. I didn't move. Because I wasn't done. I stepped forward again, folder still in hand, knowing the biggest blow was coming next. And Karen had no idea what I was about to reveal. The room was still vibrating from the shouting when I placed one final document on the table. Crisp, official, stamped in red. The moment it touched the wood, Karen froze. Her eyes dropped to the header, and every ounce of color drained from her face. For the first time since this nightmare began, she looked afraid. "This," I said, sliding the paper toward her, "is a county-issued cease and desist order." A stunned hush swept across the room. Even the angriest homeowners went silent, leaning forward as if pulled by gravity. "The county," I continued, my voice calm and controlled, "has officially halted all bridge construction effective immediately. Every worker, every contractor, every vehicle currently on my land must leave. Today. Right now." Someone gasped. Someone else cursed. Karen's fingers trembled as she read the document, her hands barely steady enough to hold the paper. "This can't be real," she whispered. But it was. And everyone in the room could see that it was. "For those wondering," I added, projecting the order onto the screen behind me, "this wasn't just a pause. The county has determined that the bridge was built on private property without permission, without jurisdiction, and with fraudulent authorization. Which means the entire project is illegal." The room erupted again, this time not with confusion but pure anger. "You lied to us," a man shouted. "You spent our money on a project we can't even use," a woman yelled from the back. "Resign," someone else screamed. "All of you." Karen's mouth opened and closed like she was searching for a lifeline, but there was none. "Not tonight. Not anymore." I held up another page. "This section here," I said, pointing, "bars the HOA and every board member from stepping foot on the bridge or anywhere on my land. Attempted access will be treated as trespassing, punishable by fines or arrest." A ripple of panic moved through the board. Even the bravest-looking members recoiled at the word arrest. I watched them squirm, their eyes darting from Karen to the furious crowd to the damning document in front of them. "And the contractors?" someone asked loudly. "What happens to them?" "They were contacted by the county this afternoon," I replied. "They've been ordered to remove all equipment immediately. The entire site is shutting down." Right on cue, dozens of cell phones began buzzing with alerts. A neighbor's group chat posting videos from the construction site. Workers were packing up. Trucks were pulling away. Machinery was being loaded. The bridge project had died the moment the county stepped in. Karen looked like she might collapse. You blindsided us," she stammered. I gave her a cold, quiet stare. "No, you blindsided yourselves when you committed fraud." The room exploded again. Only this time, the anger wasn't scattered. It was unified, directed, precise, and every bit of it aimed at Karen and the board that had enabled her. "You stole our money. You forged documents. You forced us to pay for your husband's project. Refunds, resignations, accountability." Board members panicked. The treasurer tried to slip out the side door. The vice president raised both hands in surrender, insisting he didn't know anything. Another member burst into tears. They were unraveling faster than Karen could scream. She slammed her gavel down repeatedly. "Everyone sit down. I am still your president." "No," a homeowner bellowed. "Not anymore, you're not." I watched her empire crumble in real time. And I knew the perfect time had come. I stepped forward and the room quieted, not out of respect, but anticipation. "Before this meeting ends," I said slowly, "there's one more thing you need to know." Karen's head snapped toward me. "What now?" she spat. I let the silence stretch, let the suspense tighten around the room like a drawn bowstring. "Something I did," I said, "that none of you will ever recover from." The room leaned in as I prepared to reveal the twist that would destroy everything they thought they controlled. The chaos in the room hadn't settled. Not really. But the moment I took another step toward the front, a strange, heavy silence washed over everyone. Even the shouting stopped. Even Karen's trembling hands froze midair. Something in my voice must have told them this wasn't just another piece of evidence. This was the final blow. "I sold it," I said quietly. A few people frowned, confused. Someone muttered, "Sold what?" And then, Like tearing off a bandage, I said it plainly. I sold the land. All of it, including the bridge you built. The room went dead still. No breathing, no talking, just shock. I held up the official sale documents, the ones stamped with the county seal, the ones finalized that very morning. I sold my property to the county for millions of dollars. The sale closed today. The land and everything sitting on it now belongs to the county government. Homeowners stared at me like I had just set the building on fire. The board members looked like they wanted to crawl under the table, and Karen looked like she'd just watched her entire world crumble in slow motion. You can't do that," she stammered. "That bridge is community property. The HOA paid for it. It's ours." I turned to her, almost pitying her ignorance. "No, Karen, that's not how property law works. If you build a structure illegally on private land you don't own, and without permission, that structure belongs to the landowner, not the builder, not the HOA, not the community." I paused, letting the truth sink in like poison. "You built a multi-$100,000 bridge. For me." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Homeowners grabbed their heads, cursed under their breath, and stared at Karen with betrayal so deep it felt physical. "You wasted our money," someone yelled. "You spent our dues on private land. We can't even use the bridge now?" Another homeowner demanded. I nodded slowly. "You can't. None of you can, because the county now owns the land, and therefore the bridge, and they are not handing rights to the HOA, not after the fraud." Karen shook her head violently, stepping backward as if trying to escape the reality swallowing her. No, this isn't happening. You're lying. This is illegal. I'll get a lawyer." "You should," I said. "You'll need one." A man in the audience pointed at the financial documents still on the projector. "So all the money we paid, the funds Karen pushed into this, gone?" "Gone," I confirmed. "The HOA lost every cent. There is no refund. There is no access. There is no bridge for you. The county owns it now." The room erupted again, this time with a fury I hadn't even seen during the fee increase meeting. People demanded Karen resign on the spot. They screamed for investigations. Some even threatened lawsuits right then and there. Board members pleaded innocence, distancing themselves from her as fast as they could, and Karen, she simply shook, clutching the edges of the table like the floor was slipping beneath her feet. But the night wasn't done delivering justice. My phone buzzed, a message from a neighbor outside. I opened it, and couldn't help the slow smile spreading across my face. I turned my phone so the room could see the photo. A bright, newly installed county sign standing at the entrance of the bridge. A giant whiteboard with black text, "Toll crossing, $5. A collective gasp rolled through the room. "The county moved fast," I said. "They're already turning the bridge into revenue." Karen's knees buckled. "And every single person who wants to use that bridge," I added, "will now have to pay the county. Every time." The room fell apart in screams as the reality hit. This was only the beginning of the fallout, and the worst was still coming. By the next morning, the neighborhood wasn't just angry. It was in full-scale legal war. My phone buzzed constantly, not with threats or complaints directed at me, but with screenshot after screenshot of group chats exploding across the community. People who rarely spoke to each other were suddenly united with one goal: taking down the HOA that had betrayed them. Email chains stretched for miles, with neighbors forwarding documents, maps, budget statements, and screenshots of Karen's previous announcements. Several homeowners had already contacted attorneys before sunrise. A storm had formed overnight, and Karen was directly in its path. By noon, the first homeowner officially filed a lawsuit against the HOA. By evening, over a dozen more had joined, and by the end of the day, the neighborhood had agreed to merge all their claims into a collective action. One massive, coordinated legal strike accusing the HOA of fraud, misappropriation of funds, negligence, and abuse of authority. It wasn't just anger. They had proof, they had numbers, and they finally had the courage to act. The first major casualty came quicker than anyone expected. The HOA vice president, who had sat beside Karen for years, nodding at every word she spoke, announced his resignation in a shaky statement posted in the community forum. His message was filled with excuses, claiming he had no knowledge of the financial misconduct, no involvement in the forged permits, no awareness of the development deals. But no one believed him, and the comments beneath his post made that clear. His resignation triggered panic inside the board. Within hours, 2 more board members stepped down. By the next morning, the HOA leadership was barely functional, crumbling like a structure built on sand. But the true unraveling began when forensic accountants, hired by a group of furious homeowners, started digging into the HOA's finances. And what they found made the forged permit look like a minor detail. Karen hadn't just misused funds for the bridge. She had siphoned money for years. Personal, vacations disguised as HOA conferences, home renovations listed as community aesthetic upgrades, even monthly payments to her husband's company hidden under vague labels like consulting services. Line after line of theft, manipulation, and deception came into the light, and the homeowners who once trusted her watched in horror as the truth piled up like evidence at a criminal trial. When the findings were submitted to the authorities, the county wasted no time. Karen Reynolds, self-proclaimed queen of the neighborhood, was charged with multiple offenses: fraud, document forgery, embezzlement, financial misconduct, and violation of state HOA regulations. The news spread across the community like wildfire. Some people felt vindicated, others furious, and a few simply stunned that the woman who once controlled every detail of their lives was now facing criminal charges. The board tried to function, tried to hold emergency meetings, tried to reassure the neighborhood, but it was too late. The homeowners no longer trusted the institution. Not a single rule, not a single fine, not a single demand from the HOA carried any weight anymore. And that was when the conversations began to shift. People didn't want a new president. They didn't want to elect a new board. They didn't want another Karen waiting to seize power. They wanted freedom. They wanted peace. They wanted their neighborhood back. Whispers started filling the group chats. What if we just get rid of the HOA altogether? Why not dissolve it? Start fresh? We don't need them. They destroyed themselves. By the end of the week, those whispers became a movement, a united front. And then, at a special emergency gathering in the community center, the homeowners took their seats with one purpose: a vote. Not for leadership, but for liberation. As the ballots were passed around, everyone held their breath. The neighborhood was about to vote on something unthinkable: dissolving the HOA forever. The vote wasn't even close. When the final count was announced, a wave of relief washed through the community center so powerfully it felt almost physical. Years of frustration, resentment, and quiet suffering finally broke open in a collective exhale. The HOA, the same organization that had fined people for mailbox colors, threatened homeowners over lawn height, and tried to steal my land, was officially dissolved. Just like that, its authority vanished. No more rules, no more notices, no more Karen. Walking out of the meeting that night, I felt lighter than I had in years. It was strange, watching an institution that once held so much power crumble to dust in a single vote. The homeowners lingered in the parking lot, almost dazed, as if they couldn't believe they were finally free. Some hugged, some cried, some just stood silently, letting the reality sink in. For the first time in a long time, the neighborhood felt united, ironically, brought together by the very corruption meant to control them. And the ripple effect didn't stop there. Once Karen was arrested and the HOA disbanded, all eyes turned to her husband, Richard Reynolds, the man behind Silver Lake Holdings, the mastermind of the development scheme. Without guaranteed access through my land, the foundation of his entire project collapsed. Investors pulled out immediately, unwilling to risk being associated with fraud. Contractors terminated their agreements. Banks retracted their support. The luxury development that was supposed to make him millions dissolved almost overnight. The downfall was brutal. Silver Lake Holdings' financial statements leaked in the investigation, and the public discovered an empire built on manipulation, aggressive acquisitions, and shady deals. Investors didn't just leave, they ran. Within a month, Richard filed for bankruptcy, citing unforeseen losses, though everyone knew exactly what had triggered his collapse. Without the bridge, without the land he tried to steal, he had nothing left to stand on. News trucks started showing up outside the Reynolds' home. Well, former home. Karen was taken into custody again for violating bail conditions. Richard disappeared from the public eye, reportedly living with a family member out of state. The people who once strutted around the neighborhood like royalty were now reduced to cautionary tales. As for me, I made my move quietly. The moment the county wired the final payment for my land, I packed up everything I owned and left Willow Creek behind without looking back. I didn't want to live on the edge of the chaos I'd survived. I didn't want to watch the remains of the bridge or the fractured neighborhood try to rebuild. I wanted freedom, the real kind, not the illusion HOAs pretend to offer. So I bought a home on the coast, a place where the only rules are written by the tides, a place with no councils, no boards, no presidents hungry for power. My mornings became slower, gentler, coffee on the deck, the ocean stretching out in endless blue. The world felt quiet again, peaceful, mine. But the one thing about trouble is that it always finds a way to echo back to you, even from miles away. Word spread fast. Someone from my old neighborhood messaged me, then another, then another. Screenshots and whispers traveled up the coast and finally reached my phone. They were all talking about the same thing. A rumor, a new change, something happening at the bridge the county now controlled. The toll. Apparently, it wasn't staying at $5. As the messages poured in, I leaned back in my chair, realizing the story wasn't quite done. The county had new plans for that bridge, and the rumors were only getting louder. When the county first added a $5 toll to the bridge, I thought that alone was poetic justice. But weeks later, when the rumors reached me on the coast, I realized the county had far bigger plans than I ever imagined. They weren't just using the bridge, they were monetizing it with the full force of a government looking to maximize revenue. By the time I drove back to visit the area for the first time since moving, the transformation was startling. 2 toll booths now stood at either end of the bridge, fully operational, gleaming silver, staffed during peak hours, automated at night. Large digital signs displayed real-time rates, and those rates weren't $5 anymore. They fluctuated based on traffic, sometimes rising to $8, $10, even $12 during rush hour. The county had essentially turned my old land into a permanent moneymaker, and every person who wanted to cross that bridge, especially the ones who fought so hard to build it illegally, now had to pay for the privilege. As I watched from a distance, former HOA members lined up in their cars, waiting to cross. Their faces were a mix of irritation, frustration, and disbelief. Some argued with the toll staff. Some tried to turn around, only to face a longer detour. Some simply rolled forward with a defeated slump in their shoulders, reaching out their window to tap their payment card against the toll scanner. These were the same people who had once sat beside Karen in HOA meetings, nodding eagerly at every rule, every fine, every community improvement project she pushed through. The same people who ignored the forged permits, the illegal construction, the lies. The same people who had marched across my land as if I didn't exist. Now they paid, literally, for every mistake. And I won't pretend I didn't feel satisfaction watching it happen. Because justice doesn't always come in courtrooms or handcuffs. Sometimes it comes in small, everyday consequences that remind people of the choices they made. For them, that reminder came every time their tires rolled across the bridge they funded, but could never own. I stood there for a long time, letting the wind from the river brush against me, thinking about everything that had happened. The lies, the threats, the forged signature, the arrogance that nearly cost me everything. If I'd ignored the noise, if I'd backed down, if I'd believed Karen when she told me I had silent approved, I would have lost the land, the fight, and maybe even my dignity. Instead, I fought back. And I won. That's the moral I want anyone listening to this story to understand. HOA corruption is real. Abuse of power is real. But so is your right to defend what's yours. Never assume someone else has authority over your property just because they say they do. Never ignore notices you don't remember receiving. And never let intimidation stop you from standing up for yourself. Your home, your land, is worth fighting for. As the sun began to set, I turned away from the toll booths and walked back toward my truck, ready to return to the peace of my new coastal life. The bridge, the HOA, Karen, Silver Lake Holdings, they were all behind. Me now, part of a chapter I survived and closed. But as I reached for my keys, my phone buzzed. A new message, another neighbor, another story, another fight brewing somewhere else. I looked at the screen, then at the horizon. Some battles end, others begin. And judging by what I just read, my next war with corruption is already knocking on my door.